Welcome back, America. We're here with former U.S. Attorney Brett Tolman. Brett Tolman, let's go through other aspects of the Bill of Rights. Let's talk about the Due Process Clause in the Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment. So it applies to New York. It applies to Manhattan. Due process. Now, let's see. They dumped 30,000 pages of documents on the defendant 3 weeks before the trial, they being the federal government. The judge is insisting on meeting a quick timetable to pursue this case for no reason whatsoever. The judge decides that they're going to have trial days on Fridays rather than taking off Fridays like many courts do, in order, in my view, to exclude some of the most conservative people in Manhattan and in the city of New York. That would be Orthodox Jews who tend to support Donald Trump. The judge decides that he shouldn't recuse himself, despite the fact he made a de minimis donation, as the ethics advice was. It doesn't matter if it's de minimis. It matters what's in your head, whether you're given $5 or $5,000. His daughter is a activist who's raising money on the trial for Adam Schiff and Chuck Schumer's PAC. Now, let me ask you this. With all this swirling around, wouldn't it have been the best idea for a judge to say, you know what, I'm going to step aside, another judge can handle this? And yet he doesn't. And he comes under no criticism. What do you make of that when it comes to due process?
You know, Mark, there's a lot to unpack there. I'll tell you this. I am well aware of many judges, and in fact, I would say the majority of judges that were in the same position would have recused themselves. They would have recused themselves because there's an interest in fairness, and the application of due process is very important. Remember, we have 200 plus years of history that has presumed an individual innocent. Now, it doesn't always feel that way, certainly for the accused, but one way that it does usually manifest itself is that the judges will bend over backwards to accommodate a defendant, whether it's to allow in more evidence than the prosecution might like, or whether it's to give leeway in terms of their theory of the defense. There's always a willingness by the judges to bend over backwards for the defendant. And you talked about the speedy trial. You know who actually owns that right? It's the defendant. And it's the only one that can say, hey, I need more time. The government can't. The government can't say that it needs more time, but the defendant can. So here we have Donald Trump indicating it needs more time to review documents, more time to prepare its defense. And the judge, there's not a case out there in the history of this country under these circumstances where the average white-collar crime is over 3 years long from indictment to trial. There's not a judge out there that wouldn't grant the defendant additional time to make sure that that case has the appearance of fairness. And that's the same for when you talk about the recusal issue. And this judge should have recused himself. And it was obvious, and it's obvious to many of my friends that are Democrat or Republican, that should have happened given all that's swirling around this judge.
Said a couple more of these. You kind of touched on it, but I want to focus on it like a laser. The Sixth Amendment, an impartial jury and a right to competent counsel. Tell me, how do you have competent counsel when you have counsel that's working on 4 cases at once, really 5 when you take the civil case, when you need the attention of your client to participate in his own defense? Well, he's bouncing around from courtroom to courtroom, appellate court, Supreme Court, trial courts, 4 different states. Impartial jury. Isn't the reason these cases were brought in these heavily Democrat areas is to prevent an impartial jury? They can do voir dire. They can go through that all they want. It's very difficult to get an impartial jury in a city that's 90% pro-Joe Biden. It's not an impartial Biden jury. It's an impartial jury. Yet again, this judge had the power to move the case to, say, Westchester, which is more mixed, even though it leans Democrat these days, or somewhere else, just to say, you know what? I don't want any criticism. I'm going to move this case to a county outside of New York. I'm going to step down. We're going to find a judge whose daughter isn't raising funds off the case. We're going to find a judge who's never made a political contribution, which is what they're supposed to do, make no contribution. Let's handle it that way. So the Sixth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the First Amendment are all under attack here, in my view. What do you think?
Well, 2 things there, Mark. Think about this. There is a presumption in the Department of Justice's policy and manual, a presumption to allow the states to pursue any criminal matter before they pursue the federal matter. Now, in 99% of all cases out there in a similar circumstance, the Department of Justice would say, we are going to wait until the states, Georgia on its case, the Alvin Bragg case in New York, until they have gone through indictment to trial and been finalized. Then the Department of Justice would step in, and that is according to policy. Why were they willing then to violate their internal policies? They're willing to do it because this is not an effort about finding out the facts and applying the law. This is an effort to keep down a candidate that they do not want to come back into power. So I'm watching and I'm seeing this and I'm saying to myself, they are violating all of our historical precedent in the criminal justice system that this country has seen to date.
Well, I'll tell you, as a former chief of staff to an attorney general, Edwin Meese, I'll tell you what he would have done. He would have intervened in Manhattan and said, wait a minute. It's a federal matter. I don't know what this local DA is doing in a federal matter, and he's interfering with a federal election. You dismiss this case on behalf of the United States Department of Justice and the United States government. He would have intervened, same reason, in Atlanta and said, I don't know what she's doing with RICO and all the rest of it, but this is a federal matter. It is not a state matter. She has no right to get involved with a civil RICO case in a federal election, because that's what it's about. Instead, as you point out, we have a Department of Justice that is serving the interest of Biden, that wants to clear the field so that Biden does not have a Republican nominee, Donald Trump, to run against. Brett Tolman, I want to thank you very much for your past service as U.S. Attorney, and I want to thank you now as well.
Thank you.
God bless you, my friend. We'll be right back.